big topics, big ideas, and practical policy solutions. This is Leaders on the Frontier with your host, David Leis.
Well, hi, everybody. It's December 5, 2024, the year of our Lord. It's David Leis here, your proud host of Leaders on the Frontier. And we're delighted that you can all join us today as we talk about a lot of very, very important issues, especially when it comes to our border, our security, our nation, and our neighbor to the south and the north, technically, the United States of America. As we've heard a lot this last few weeks, I think it's only been about 2 weeks perhaps, that we heard about the incoming president of the United States, Donald Trump, talk about the need for higher tariffs if Canada, as well as our neighbor to the far, far south, Mexico, doesn't get their act together. So we're going to dare to explore some pretty important issues around that. And so a warm welcome to all of you for joining us, the audience. We're eager to hear about your questions and comments. What do you think? Is this just a shallow negotiation tactic, or what's really going on here? So we're going to dive into those issues with our special guest, who I will introduce in a moment. In the meantime, I want to thank all of you for the myriad of comments that you reflect and offer us in terms of the kinds of discussions that we have. And I really appreciate it from coast to coast, as well as other parts of the world. So we're really grateful for that. And good afternoon to you, Prairie. Again, we're glad that we have a great set of regulars right across the nation. It's really exciting. And again, thank you for all those comments and questions. So right off the top, I'm going to highlight a few news stories, some interesting things. It's fascinating. It's December the 5, and I can't recall off the top of my head a historical fact, but I do remember what happened in 1909. As a kid, I was and still am to some degree, a Montreal Habs fan, although I would say I'm a Winnipeg Jets fan by far. But the Montreal Canadiens on December the 4th were founded a long, long time ago. So imagine that, on December the 4th, 1909. So what other points of historical trivia do you know? Well, there's a lot of headlines going on this week in Canadian politics. You may have heard that Christmas is on its way, and of course, politicians want to get in on the act. And so what do you think about this $250 GST rebate check? Is it purely electoral politics? Does it have or merit any real public policy? What do you think about it as they try to, the Trudeau government tries to deal with things such as affordability? Is it going to help out you? Will that put a bit of gas in your tank, both literally and metaphorically? What do you think about that? Well, it seems like a lot of polls are suggesting that it's not really making much of a difference. It appears that a Leger National Post poll suggests that it's backfiring. Less than, 22% think that it is actually a good idea. 65% would not change their vote. So maybe it's not really going to help them. So what do you think? The other thing I wanted to highlight is kind of a mixed story, and it has to do with this notorious Bill C-63. You may recall that the bill has two parts. The one is about online bullying, or getting rid of harm to people who are online. And the second part is quite ominous. It's going back to 1984, frankly, when we have talked about this issue many times, is that Bill C-63, its second part, is really a full frontal assault on freedom of speech, as it seeks to censor and shut down people that we disagree with. And I think it's obviously of great concern. So the news that we've heard this week is that the sitting government is looking at putting aside part two and not pursuing it, but going ahead with part one, even though we arguably have laws regarding online bullying. But what do you think? Is that good news? Or are there other pieces of legislation that quite frankly do the job regarding censorship in this great country, Canada? So it's a great concern. It reminds me of a quote from Margaret Thatcher, who said, "Unless you have freedom of discussion over a whole society, you soon cease to have any new ideas. And without new ideas, how do you have continued prosperity, let alone how do you continue to be, in my view, human?" So that's a thought of the day for you. We also know an interesting report came out that said that Canada's infrastructure investment is not keeping up. And this is according to an analysis that was done here. It says the average age of the country's non-housing capital stock was just over 9 years old in 2023, leaving almost 64% of its useful life remaining, according to a data released by none other than Stats Canada. So the point is that this is getting to be a problem as the trend line is down. A decrease in the remaining useful service life ratio could indicate that new capital investment is sorely required. So what do you think? Is infrastructure important as we look around at the highways? The Canada Post strike continues. What do you think we should do? Should it be called to an end? It seems like various decision makers are reluctant to put their thumb in that and deal with it. How is the Canada Post strike impacting you? That's a question to you. So there's lots going on in this great country. And one of the things that has happened is, of course, the so-called tweet from Donald Trump, the incoming president. The incoming administration, the Trump administration, has lots of assertive agenda. And this will impact not only the United States, but the world, including Canada. We heard that there's concerns about Canada's border security and issues regarding not only human trafficking, but terrorism and even drugs. So that tweet sent a lot of our leadership class in this country scrambling as premiers met with the Prime Minister. And would you believe the Prime Minister even went cap in hand to the Southern White House in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago, and Trudeau actually met with the incoming president, and they had a discussion. And it's not clear exactly what all happened, but what is clear is there was some jovial discussion over dinner, as well as some very clear messages made around the need for Canada to get its, quote, act or Security Act and border into shape. And also there was some, well, what do you think? Was it a joke when the president referred to the need to perhaps make Canada a new U.S. state, and maybe the Prime Minister then would become a, quote, governor? And there was even an interesting picture that I think was done with the help of artificial intelligence, or AI, that showed Donald Trump showing a sweeping Canada-like vista over the mountains, saying, "Oh, Canada," with a huge Canadian flag in the background. What was that all about? Well, so what do you think? What's going on there? So we have a lot of very interesting issues to talk about today, and I really invite you to like and share this discussion. These are very important discussions because, as it was said a long time ago after 9/11, those brutal terrorist attacks, that an important principle was being invoked at that time, and that was that security trumps trade. And I say this phrase deliberately as a paraphrase with the incoming president. But what do you think about that? So with us here today, I am honored to welcome our friend and our guest. He's a security analyst, Scott McGregor. So a warm welcome to you, Scott, my friend. Oh, I think we're not hearing you. But I will tell you once we get Scott's audio up here, Scott is a intelligence operator with the Armed Forces formerly, and he's also worked as a intelligence advisor with the RCMP, and he also runs a intelligence consultancy. So a warm welcome to you, Scott.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Scott, one of the things that we've talked a lot about a number of security related issues as it relates to Canada, including the issue of foreign interference. And you wrote a brilliant book with another colleague, Ina Mitchell, And I really recommend this book. It's called The Mosaic Effect. And it's really takes an in-depth view of how the Chinese Communist Party started a hybrid war in America's backyard. And America's backyard, what is the reference there, Scott? I think this is very apropos to our discussion, is it not?
I would say it is. Yeah, America's backyard is Canada, obviously.
Okay, so just to be clear, America's backyard is Canada. So you, in this analysis, you break down in stunning detail. Again, it's kind of like truth is stranger than fiction. In fact, somebody should make a movie out of this book. My recommendation is you break down in great detail, footnotes and all, pictures of all kinds of people that have been working steadily with the Chinese government. And so what is your basic thesis in that book, Scott? Can you tell us more about it?
Certainly. The premise of the book starts with a classified document called Operation Dragonlord, which is an American classified document by the Department of Justice. It involves the NSA, the FBI, and others. And it identifies Canada as a national security threat to the United States. So Canada is a threat to the United States. Now, this document was written 30 years ago. So this isn't something new. The Americans have known for a long time that Canada's, had some issues that are impacting its national security. In the document, it actually identifies some politicians and others where the FBI has been looking into them. So that's the beginning of the book. The book also lays out exactly how China conducts hybrid warfare. And for those that are uninitiated into what hybrid warfare is, that you may be hearing in the news a lot more lately, that's the political, the economic, and transnational organized crime. That's keeping it really simple. I don't like to complicate it too much. But we see all these things now. You're reading them in the news. They're on TV, and it's complex, but you're starting to see a much broader picture as it unfolds today.
Okay, so we've kind of led with this point because that's actually the story here. This goes beyond simply a tweet, if you will, by the incoming President Donald J. Trump on Truth Social that somehow Canada needs to get its border together and that somehow, gosh, it's not simply that simple, is it? There's a deeper story here that we need to pay attention to. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, the tweet is very strategic. It's basically putting Canada and Mexico, giving them a warning that they need to take care of what's going on in their countries if they want to deal with the United States. The United States has had enough. And that's been the, kind of what we've been trying to say for a long time now. Some of the things that we were reporting, say 2015, were being brought up in the Pentagon. So what's happening in Canada, the intelligence community within the United States is well aware of what's happening here. More so, I would say, than what we have in Canada. The apparatus in Canada is just now starting to grasp what's been going on. I think they're starting to read the book
just
too.
hold on for a sec here. That is a very significant headline. So you're saying, I mean, you have worked the halls of intelligence apparatus for a long time. You're saying that the United States knows more about the security issues in this country than perhaps our officials, know themselves.
100%. I would say any major law enforcement interaction that you've seen is related to U.S. intelligence sharing information. For instance,
Okay.
the head of the RCMP's intelligence being arrested and charged and convicted. That stems from an operation that the United States completed regarding encrypted cell phones.
Okay, so this is like peeling the perennial onion here. And by the way, we had a hello from Brian in Kentucky. So welcome to our American friends here as we talk about really the whole need for continental security. Like this is our closest ally, the United States. We're our second largest trading partner. And hello, Mark Wren from Kitchener. We have a very important foundational relationship to our prosperity in our lives is how we work together as continental neighbors. And you just told us about a very significant story I want people to be aware of, but a very important former official, intelligence official on the Canadian side, was looked at. And what, tell us what the story was here.
So that individual was running intelligence for the RCMP, and they became embroiled in a conversation with a man named Ramos, who was part of something called Phantom Secure. Phantom Secure was providing encrypted devices to the cartels, the Iranians, and the Chinese. He stems from Vancouver, but he was arrested in the United States. He was indicted in the United States, and it's very likely that the information he shared shed light on, some of the infrastructure within Canada. Encrypted cell phones is topic of the day. There's been numerous occasions where that information and that technology has been utilized, not just in cell phones, but also in port security, etc. So in Antwerp and other places like that. So Canada is a hotbed for that. But he was arrested, and subsequently the FBI managed to find some information, share with Canadians, and that's what initiated the indictment.
Okay, so that was a very significant wake-up call for the vulnerabilities within our intelligence network and other related issues. And the context is that our relationship with the United States is not obviously just economic and cultural, but it is also related to particular military and intelligence alliances. We have, of course, the relationship of NATO and NORAD, but also the Five Eyes. Can you tell us more about the Five Eyes and what that means?
Certainly. So the Five Eyes is mainly an intelligence coalition between the five countries of the United States, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. When you mentioned continentalism, which is something that I've discussed previously, that's looking at the Five Eyes mainly taking on a stance of looking out for each other, but also protecting their environment. So when we saw Brexit happen, the United Kingdom pulled away from the European Union. They're an island. North America, for the most part, is an island. Australia is an island. New Zealand is an island. So all of these countries need to protect all of their borders. And the Five Eyes probably in the Western world are the leading elements, I guess you might say, in the intelligence world on the classified side. That doesn't mean that we don't work with the other countries like NATO and some of our other allies, but the closeness based on geosocial and geopolitical goals, well, that's what really ties us together. So the Five Eyes is something that, in my opinion, is what shapes the West's resistance to its adversaries like China, Russia, North Korea, etc.
Okay, so that's a very significant relationship that is perhaps being looked at in the context of how is Canada a reliable partner in that kind of intelligence commitment. The Five Eyes being, again, a reminder, the nations of the United States, Canada, the UK, Australia, and of course, New Zealand. So when we look at this type of issue, today I want to remind the audience I'm talking with Scott McGregor, a former intelligence officer with the armed forces as well as the RCMP, and he is a independent intelligence consultant. So, Scott, the type of tweet, if you will, that was issued by Donald J. Trump, how do you view that? So it's not just simply a kind of a negotiation missive, or is it?
To a point, I would say it is a negotiation tool, but really the negotiation is stating that the United States is taking a stance, and you're either with us or you're against us. What's been happening to the United States is infiltration from both Mexico and Canada of everything from illicit goods to human smuggling to you name it. Everything's coming through the borders, and that's that. And I mean, sometimes those borders are not physical. Things that are emanating from Canada make its way to the United States. I'm sure we're going to discuss other things like the TD Bank and others, but
Mm-hmm.
he's just letting us know. And it depends on who you are, because it means different things to different people.
Mm-hmm.
When you're already living this and working in this environment, then you have an awareness of what's going on. So I think the tweet reached a lot more people. We've seen a change in sentiment towards aggressors like China, within Canada especially. And the wake up call is here. It's in our news. It's in our politics. It's everywhere now. So people are becoming more alive to what's happening. And I would say that what he just did was identify the cognitive dissonance that's going on in Ottawa. I know the Canadian ambassador to the United States just stated openly that Canada only accounts for 2% of the fentanyl going into the United States, which is completely inaccurate.
Yeah, okay, so just hold on for a sec. You're saying that a senior Canadian official talks about 2% that Canada's responsible for is some 2% of the fentanyl trade, and that's nonsense?
That's absolute nonsense. And it's
So
it's
what?
it's it's odd because she happens to be in DC, where you would think that she would have better access to information. But again, it all depends on who's advising you and what political stance you're trying to take. So the government has been advised of what's been going on in Canada for a number of years. Myself and others have been raising concerns and trying to
Mhm.
raise awareness within government. And only now, when Donald Trump sends a tweet, do we suddenly get a reaction.
Okay. So, well, by golly, we've got a reaction. I'm curious what you as an audience think about this issue. Because to my introduction, security does ultimately trump trade, right? And this is, I guess, something that perhaps we don't quite understand is how visceral and important this issue of security is for the United States. As well, frankly, tens of thousands of people die of fentanyl overdoses in the United States. I mean, in Canada, it is also pretty bad. I think in Vancouver, I believe, if memory serves me correctly, on an annualized basis, well over 2,000 people are dying every year. I mean, it's horrific to imagine 2,000 people lined up in caskets who have died because of drug overdoses. I mean, it's hard to comprehend. So in this context, is that really part of what's driving this issue in the United States? Is just simply the incredible carnage that drug trafficking is making in the United States?
It definitely is. More people have died of fentanyl in the United States than they did in World War II. Now that is
Sorry, can
something.
you repeat that? More
More
people
people
have
have died of
died.
fentanyl overdoses in the United States than they lost in World War II.
That is horrific.
That is shocking. There's a lot of concerns around something like fentanyl. It's a synthetic narcotic. It's replacing things like heroin. It's being found in every other narcotic you can think of, from meth to marijuana. So it's a very big concern to them. And because it can be made domestically, it's no longer something that you can protect against in terms of source countries, right? So originally, when we were looking at cocaine, etc., we were worried about places like Colombia and Peru, places that are outside of the country. And now you're finding that within our own trade partners, this stuff is being produced en masse, and being fed to the United States. Now, a lot of people might say, this is just evolution, and that's a possibility. I'm here to tell you that I believe there's intent behind what's going on. There's definitely more to what is happening with fentanyl than people realize. And fentanyl, for anybody that doesn't know, 2 grains of salt-sized fentanyl will kill a human being. Carfentanil, which is something that's 1,000 times more potent than fentanyl, is also something that's being brought into the country. Now, the precursors for fentanyl come from a country called China, and they've been coming to Canada in bulk for a very long time because it's legal. Now, the people that are doing this are no fools, and they use nominees and numbered companies that will bring the precursors in. But the fact of the matter is that those narcotics are being produced in Canada. Canada is a transshipment point or a source country. Canada doesn't have the population base or the money to make that much off of this type of drug. Having said that, if a dealer was to get his hands on some fentanyl, unlike heroin, he can step on it, which means you can break it up into smaller amounts to make 10,000 times more money than he would with the same amount of heroin. Now, that's something for bad guys to consider when they're being approached to say, hey, would you like to sell this? And the terrible part is that, yes, it does affect some of our homeless population. In Vancouver, you have the downtown east side, etc. But that's not where this all ends up. This is killing doctors and lawyers' kids. This is killing doctors and lawyers. And some of this stems from our issue with the medical system, where people, had sports injuries and they were put onto narcotics that would help them. And then suddenly that was outlawed and they were left with nowhere to go. And so they end up going and trying to get something to help them, which is called green 80s. So those are little green pills that are produced using pill presses. And that's what people buy. Hopefully it's made so that there's not more than 2 grains of fentanyl in it. Unfortunately, as everyone's seen in the news numerous times, that's not the case. So one of the big things I wanted to bring up was the regulation of pill presses in Canada. And, we've raised this concern for years. Pill presses are not regulated. Anyone can go and buy a pill press. Problem with that is you get bad guys that are making multiple kinds of narcotics, ecstasy, Molly, all these things in these pill presses. And so you never know what exactly you're going to get. They're not the cleanest of places. The super lab that was just busted in the interior of British Columbia.
Yes.
Now that was a lab, and as you saw, it was quite clean. Most of these other places are not. Ones that use scientists and chemists to make this stuff tend to be higher quality. People take those lessons and try and do it themselves. The results are deadly. So that's part of the problem. How it moves is another problem. People think it's going to be a bag of pills, and quite often it's not. It's in liquid form, in Gatorade bottles. So try and stop somebody at the border with a Gatorade bottle. It's pretty difficult. So we can go back to the border issue when you want to lay that out for the audience.
Okay, so this sounds like an octopus to me as we look at the different layers of issues that make this issue kind of deceiving. So there's a lot to pack here, and we are. I recall in November, a very interesting U.S. think tank announced a release of a report that Canada has become a safe haven, an international hub for notorious crime groups, as illicit trade in the country is, quote, booming, according to a report by an American think tank. Quote, Canada has become a safe zone for the world's most notorious crime groups and threat networks that are harming Canada's national security of other nations. And this was released by the International Coalition Against Illicit Economies. So this is a very interesting report, and I think it basically underlines the point that you're making, is that Canada is now a production hub and a hub of criminal activity of some of the notorious crime gangs in the world. Is that, again, what you're saying, Scott?
That's very true. And those are colleagues of mine from that think tank. I'm also a security advisor in a think tank called Council for Countering Hybrid Warfare. It's an international think tank. Similar discussions, similar products are being produced to raise awareness. Some of it is also for teaching law schools, etc., about what's happening. So that is exactly what we're seeing. Canada is actually, I'll use the example of Vancouver. 66% of all RCMP files in the entire country happen in the lower mainland of British Columbia. So let that sink in for a minute. That's what most of our federal police is. So that means most of the crime is happening in that region. That doesn't mean that it's not happening elsewhere in the country. We know that Ontario, Toronto, is also another center of gravity. But Vancouver is the center of gravity for transnational organized crime in North America. not New
Pardon
York,
me?
not
Pardon
LA.
me?
Vancouver is the center of gravity. It's the largest threat in North America. As one of my colleagues in DC said, it is like a combination of Miami and Dubai. You have state and non-state actors working with local host nation gangs of the highest caliber in the world. It is the financial hub for all of the money laundering in the world. Yes. And the encryption that we're talking about that facilitates a lot of the mid to lower level activity, even some of the higher level activity, originates in Vancouver. I've done a few different interviews. I did one with the Fifth Estate, talked about this. And I've done one with Japan talking about crypto. Vancouver is the center of gravity. I'll tell you another thing. The headquarters for the Belt and Road Initiative for the Chinese is in Vancouver. It's in South Surrey. There's an article written by a man named Graham Wood a few years ago that I worked with him on, and it clearly identifies this. It's identified in the book as well. So to think that what's happening in Canada is new, it's not. It's been around for 30 plus years. It's managed to get into everything. When I talk to analysts working in law enforcement and the intelligence world, they used to say it's permeated before I came along. And now they say it's completely saturated. Every single federal file they look at ties back to the same individuals, the same networks. It's rampant. It's everywhere. And this is what Trump is trying to tell us, because apparently he can get it across better than anyone else. We have problems and we need to solve them if we want to, do business with the United States.
Okay, so this is a bombshell of a revelation, right? Canada, specifically Vancouver, is a super hub. So we've got some comments coming in. Crypto Beauty says this guy is blowing my mind. Yes, indeed. Fantastic interview. Other comments as well. Brian Cassidy, Pierre Trudeau, the Club of Rome, and the degrowth of Canada is a very interesting comment because, pardon me, it begs the question. This is not just organic. This is all facilitated actively by a number of interests. I mean, if you think of the world production of fentanyl, where does a lot of this come from, Scott?
So, I mean, the original thinking was that it was China. And don't get me wrong, China certainly is the catalyst for all of this. That's where all the precursors come from. They go to Mexico and they come to Canada.
Yes.
And if we want to get into it, we can start to look at who owns what ports in what countries, and how those companies that are involved in those ports manage to get that stuff into the country. We can look at CBSA and what its mandates are, and the fact that they only check 2% of container ships coming into the country, and most of that is for nuclear, biological, and chemical.
Okay, hold on here, Scott. You're running hard here. 2%, sorry, less than 2% of hundreds of thousands of container ships coming in. I believe the Port of Vancouver is the second largest port on the west coast of this continent. And you're saying less than 2% are inspected? And then meanwhile, in Halifax, I mean, this is, what should it be? What percentage should be inspected, Scott? I guess that's another question.
This is the issue when it comes to supply chain management, supply chain security. Validating who is receiving and who is shipping, the due diligence aspects, and I would call it enhanced due diligence, is not, there's no capability for that. There are people that want to do this work. They're hamstrung by mandates, legislation, and other aspects. As a regulatory body, you have to remember that CBSA, the RCMP, and CSIS are all sub-ministries of the Ministry of Public Safety. So they're all political. So, you can only work against the system if you have the tools, and they don't have the tools, or the money or the people to do it. That's why the discussion keeps coming up that in the ports, should we just have more people and should we be doing this? Well, the ports are controlled by bad guys already. There's open source reporting on this already that, the Ndrangheta, the traditional organized crime, the mafia, work with the Iranians and the Hells Angels in the ports. This has
Okay.
been out for a long time.
Okay. Wow.
Addressing
So
those
it sounds
things, I
like
don't think big
a
arrest.
train wreck. It
Yeah.
sounds like a train wreck here, Scott, with all the container ships. I mean, this is kind of like open our eyes. And I think the message here is loud and clear. There's a much, much deeper story here that's going on in Canada that we need to open our eyes and wrap our arms around. It never happened just overnight. This has been going on for years, and we've got to arm up, tool up, so we don't threaten our economic future. Is that it in a nutshell, Scott?
Yeah, that's the way to look at it. I think you have to understand that if we enter into a conflict as part of NATO or the Five Eyes, with what we're seeing in the South China Sea and other areas, things go kinetic. That we're very vulnerable. We don't have our military is about 60,000 people. The same size as what we have for Canada Post right now. We don't have a lot of capability when it comes to defending ourselves militarily, let alone from the hybrid war. Someone, Crypto Beauty was on here. So for Crypto Beauty, here's one: 3,000 Chinese attacks per minute by the Chinese on British Columbia provincial agencies. So Canada's at war and doesn't even know it. That's just the crypto side, or pardon me, that's just the cyber side of
Okay.
things.
Yeah. So the point is, war is simply not kinetic war, a hot war. War is multidimensional. We're into generation warfare where people manipulate information big time, but they go at us at every angle of attack, including on cyber security issues. So we've got a lot of comments here. Crypto Beauty says, exactly, follow the money. So we've heard a lot about TD Bank, and TD Bank is obviously a reputable bank, but there are some serious problems with TD Bank in terms of money laundering. And this has happened with other financial institutions in this country too. What's the significance of that story, and how does that link in with what we're talking about?
Well, TD Bank, you've likely read the open source reporting on that, and it talks about the facilitation to cartels. For those that don't know, the Sinaloa cartel had a headquarters in Canada.
Pardon
They
me?
operate.
What,
They
sorry,
operate here.
what did you just?
Yeah. The Sinaloa had a headquarters here in Canada. El Chapo was running mostly methamphetamine and some other narcotics, but they have a huge presence here. The CJNG also has a presence in Canada. So these are top level people that we're talking about. We're not talking about lieutenants or something, like people down in the trenches. We're talking about their big bosses operating in Canada, and that's because Canada is this soft landing space. You can pretty much do anything, get away with anything in Canada. When was the last time you saw a money laundering case actually result in a conviction? I'll wait. There isn't any. In the case of the Toronto Bank, the TD Bank, who's been arrested in Canada? No one. So you're telling me you're paid $3 billion fine for money laundering issues and no one's going to jail? I would dare say that Mr. Trump has a list of other banks, and I know very well that there are other banks, and the pressure is going to be put on to start correcting some of the issues that we have.
Okay, so gosh, this is a wake up call as we're with Scott McGregor today. He's a security analyst and author of the book, The Mosaic Effect. I really recommend it to you. Keep bringing in the comments, the questions. Share this with your friends and get the word out. Because why does this issue matter? Because, well, let me put it this way. Do you think there's a high chance, Scott, that Canada will get caught in this tariff? The Prime Minister, I believe, at Mar-a-Lago in Florida said to Donald Trump, this is going to really impact Canada's economy. 25%? It's hard to imagine that. I mean, this is really major. So because we can't get our Security Act together, we have a high risk that this is going to hit us and boomerang our economy. Do you think that's a high risk? Do you think we're looking at this real possibility, Scott?
I think if Canada doesn't play ball, we're in big trouble. We already lose trillions of dollars to the illicit market right now, from trade-based money laundering to service-based money laundering, the trafficking pieces. So we have the transnational organized crime stuff. That's the criminal side of this. The side that people forget is that these guys are working with state and state-sponsored, so proxies. This is completely infiltrated every aspect of Canadian culture. Every aspect. Anything you look at, I could tell you something that's bad about it. And that's scary.
So can you wait a sec? Can you give an example so we understand that? What are you driving at?
Well, what I'm driving at is if we're looking at our trade relations with partners, we're talking about China, so let's talk about China. When you think about importing something from China, maybe it's cabinets, maybe it's marble, maybe it's whatever it is that you're trying to get. The people that are facilitating that are conducting trade-based money laundering and service-based money laundering, meaning when someone is going to pay a certain amount for something, let's say it's worth $1,000 and they pay them $10,000, then there's a service that is provided for the other $9,000. Or that money is laundered. Here in Canada, it's pretty easy to do. As you've seen, no one's getting arrested for money laundering in Canada.
Okay, so that includes the concerns regarding, for example, casinos. Is that right?
Oh, for sure. Casinos are very, very difficult to monitor in terms of how the money gets in there. The casinos do their best, and they follow the rules and the regulations as best they can. The PCML-TFA, which is the Proceeds of Crime, Terrorist Financing, Money Laundering Act, is pretty definitive, and it's mainly about reporting. So what we get is a lot of reporting, and then zero consequences. I can think of people that had hundreds of suspicious transaction reports, and nothing's ever happened to them. So where did that money come from?
And so, but why would that be, Scott? Like, these are arguably serious crimes, and there's no consequences. So what is going on here? It begs the issue, like, either law enforcement is not being supported, they're undermined by the design of the law, or the people at the very, very top are compromised, or some combination thereof. I mean, what's going on here?
You said it, not me.
I said it.
I would say that everything you just said is absolutely true.
Okay, so that's the summary right there, folks. Wow, what a mind-blowing story. This is a very important issue. We got lots of comments. Norwood Cooper says, Pierre Polyev just said the checking of the sea cans was only, less than 2% or 0.02% of all the ones coming in the port. So maybe it's even lower, Scott, if that's what I understand from that comment. Wow.
And he's speaking, I think, to narcotics or that type of thing. I'm saying in total, 2% or less is checked.
Gosh, this doesn't really build a lot of confidence. So we got to get our act together. So we know that we got to look at our courts, our ports and our courts. And the U.S. is looking at everything. So we can't really separate the economy from security here. So if we care about our economy, our standard of living, we got to get with the program. So let this be a wake-up call. And I guess the question is a fascinating one that came up here, and that is, do we empower our border officials? And I'm a bit of a fan. I watched the program over the years called Border Security, where they're checking out people and find a bit of salami in someone's bag, and then they say, they give them a warning. But the punchline is this: do we empower our customs officials to be like police officers or not?
Definitely not. They do not have the same powers as the police. Criminal matters are turned over to the RCMP. The RCMP is shorthanded. And to be honest, in British Columbia, at least, a police officer can't charge someone. They can recommend charges to Crown. So if we have any issues with our justice system, whether it's corruption or just the fact that the legislation doesn't seem to work, because it's ancient in a lot of areas, then they're doing all this work for nothing, you know. And it's disheartening for not just the people that are, you know, wanting this to be corrected, but for the police officers themselves that are doing the work, that have, you know, all of the intention of upholding the law and putting bad guys in jail. No one joins the, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's people that sneak in, but no one really joins the police to not put bad guys away. They all want to put bad guys away.
Yeah.
They are just being hamstrung. Part of it is political will. There, you know, we don't see the political will behind some of this, but mainly the, you know, legislative reform that needs to occur is there. I would dare say that there's also some issues between information sharing. I've spoken about this at length about how there's convergences between national security level information and law enforcement levels information. In the United States, in 2011, President Obama had an executive order, and that was to make transnational organized crime a national security threat. What that did, this is post 9/11, what that did was allows their agencies to work with their military and others in sharing classified information that would impact law enforcement or criminal activity. So that I worked a lot with the people in the United States on this, and I actually showed Canada how we could do this and work with the Americans and the rest of the Five Eyes, but also conducted in Canada. And that was kind of lost. They just didn't have the political backing to proceed with that. To this day, we do not have a strategy in Canada on transnational organized crime. And
You've got to be kidding.
It's
seriously.
It's been almost 10 years now that we've been screaming from the top of our lungs. You at least have to get everybody working together. Our intelligence agency is domestic. We don't have an international intelligence agency. So, yeah, you know, you're limited. They're like the FBI because the FBI is domestic as well. So we don't have some of the capabilities that the United States does. When it comes to money laundering, we don't have a law called structuring, which is people that are putting money in repeatedly under the $10,000 limit. So in the United States, if you do that, you know, they're going to catch you and you're going to go to jail. In Canada, we don't have that. They have FinCEN. FinCEN actually has teeth, and they work with something called the Office of Foreign Asset Control under the Department of Justice. They're the ones that put sanctions on the cartels, terrorist organizations, the Iranian groups, etc. Canada doesn't have that. We do not have that capability. FinTrack, you know, responds to requests, and they tend to take a long time to get replies back, depending on what it is. But they have the capability to fine an entity $500,000 for each instance where they didn't properly report. Now, in the casino area, I would say that would be significant because there were a lot of that going on and there were zero results. So if the agencies aren't working together, it's difficult to do anything. And I think Trump's tweet is trying to say, get your act together and let's move forward.
Wow, this is quite a conversation with our friend Scott McGregor, an intelligence analyst, and we really appreciate everyone's comments that keep coming in fast and furious. But it sounds like we don't have a national security. We need to empower our border agents. We need to get them not only the modern technology to do their job, we need to get the law behind them so we can get on with getting the bad guys. And we need to examine port security. I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I want to just be a little bit of a devil's advocate for a second here. And that is, some have suggested that the whole idea that this Trump wake-up call lumps us in with Mexico, which is a different cat. I mean, it's obviously a great country, but it has a lot of major challenges as a kind of a narco state. Is that really fair, Scott, that the incoming president lumped us in with Mexico. I mean, surely in the age of Biden, with an open border with Mexico, with literally millions streaming in and all kinds of other nonsense, why is it appropriate that somehow our best friend, the United States, would lump us in with Mexico, of all things? No offense to Mexico. Well, I mean, we love that country, but do you know what I'm getting at, Scott?
People
Is
are
that
going
really
to
fair?
be upset when I say this, but I'm going to tell you right now. Canada is a bigger threat to the United States than Mexico.
Pardon me? You got to be
And
kidding, Scott.
I'm dead serious. I had a briefing that I gave a general from Northcom. So he's the guy that runs the Northern Command. He looks at the border. And he said that they were concerned that they had put so many assets on the south, they had no idea what was going on in the north. When you see these people that have gotten into the United States without any issues, okay, it's not because some coyote in Mexico managed to get some Hezbollah guy into the States. In Canada, you just walk right across the border. You join the Nexus program and you go right through. Canada is the leaky sieve. I'm telling you, what's happening here is so much higher level. And it's not to say that Mexico doesn't have a lot of bad things going on, but the amount of law enforcement, national security assets that are operating in that region, you couldn't believe what they're looking at and what they understand. In Canada, when I said that they know more about what's going on in Canada, that's because they were tipped off by myself and others while we worked in the government. And then they started to look for themselves. So they know what's happening here, and they know the level of what's happening here. I don't know if everyone's aware, but Vancouver has the largest Iranian diaspora post-Shah in the world.
Sorry, what do you mean by that? Can you explain that to us?
Sure, certainly. So that means there are more Iranians that are connected to individuals and entities and organizations that are not pro-West. So IRGC, Hezbollah, Quds Force, those individuals are all operating here in Canada, mainly based out of Vancouver. You saw, I think in the news a while back, there was a big bust and a bunch of Iranian people were caught in Ontario.
That's right, yeah.
Those were the junior members. And they got off. Nothing happened to them. So that's what you're looking at here. We have the biggest threats in Canada. I know. I saw a comment somebody said about dope and guns. Just it's anywhere across the border. It's so easy, and they're not wrong. But there's even bigger ways. So Canada is a transshipment point. When things are coming into Canada, it's no one's looking at what's going out. And so we tend to be the place where, some stuff gets offloaded to pay for things like security, supply chain management, and that kind of thing. And yes, it impacts our cities, and yes, it gets across Canada, etc. But it's mainly destined for other places like Australia and Japan, where in Japan, methamphetamine is 700 times more expensive than it is in Canada. Why would you sell it in Canada?
Exactly.
Get it to Mexico. Or get it to right.
But it strikes me that there's a lot of interrelated issues here related to security, big time, that we are kind of asleep at the switch on or knowingly enable it from all kinds of angles. And it's interesting, as an example, I know that one third of cigarettes in Canada are through the black market. So obviously, if cigarettes can easily flow through at that level, I mean, it's obviously involving huge criminal syndicates. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that this is happening on all kinds of fronts, including fentanyl, drugs, and all the rest. That's the theme, isn't it?
Well, they've said that the cigarettes have exceeded cocaine. Illegal cigarettes, there's some open source information on cigarettes related to Hezbollah. So that's how they fund a lot of their operations, both here in the West, but also externally.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Scott? I I think I heard what you said, but you got to repeat this. This is bizarre.
Yeah, cigarettes outweigh the amount of cocaine imported into Canada. So illicit cigarettes is massive. So tobacco is one of the big areas of regulation when you look at regulatory bodies across Canada, and they've known for a long time that it's a big deal, but they didn't quite realize just how big. So it's bigger than cocaine.
Okay, so this is
Easier to
just
move.
infuriating. I mean, this is crazy. And it's interesting. The incoming border czar in the Trump administration, is it Tom Hallman, is right from upstate New York here. That he would know all about this, wouldn't he?
He certainly would. Cornwall's a point of interest.
Yeah.
I've lived in that region, so I know a fair amount about it.
I mean, this is crazy. So, what do you think? I'm talking to Scott McGregor, intelligence analyst and author of, again, The Mosaic Effect. We're talking about the new Trump administration, basically saying we're fed up and we need Canada to pull up its socks. So, as we look at this issue, how do we summarize why this is an important issue? Why should Canadians care about this important issue? Scott.
Well, I think the first point is when you're looking at the price of things in Canada, we're in a country that has probably more natural resources than almost any other country. We have oil, we have everything you could possibly think of. And having lived in the Middle East for a year, and filled my car up for $3, it's disheartening to see that people are struggling to find somewhere to live, that people are having trouble affording groceries. When places like Saudi Arabia pay their citizens, 60 something thousand US dollars a year just for being a citizen, and all they have is oil. We don't refine what we have. I think that Canada has a lot of opportunity to progress economically. I think a lot of people have sold out when it comes to where that money goes and the organizations that control that money. There's a good report, if anybody wants to look it up, called the Sidewinder Report. It's
Exactly, I was
unclassified
going to
now.
say. Yeah,
It's secret,
amazing.
but it's unclassified. And in my book, I actually have a copy of the Off Dragon Lord document that also helps you understand which organizations, companies, and people have been involved in this for the last 30 years. So Canada's been undermined in a lot of different ways, internally and externally. We've been exploited mainly for our lax laws and kindness, naivete to a certain point. And I dare say that Canada's tried to offset, the strength of the United States by saying, hey, we'll try to work with some other partners so that you can't completely control the trade agreement between the two of us. Unfortunately, when it comes to security, as you mentioned, David, Canada is completely reliant on its allies, and the main ally in that is the United States. It's where almost all of the classified information derives from. They have assets all over the world. We do not. And if we don't start working with them, basically, Canada's in big trouble. It's been called a vassal state of China already. So we need to wake up and do something about it. I know lots of people want to.
All right. Well said, Scott McGregor. This is a very serious topic. It puts in jeopardy our economy, our future standard of living, and frankly, it's a security issue for all of us. As we look around our community and our loved ones and their safety, we should be all over this. It's interesting. We got a lot of comments, and a key question here as we start to wrap up things is, Scott, how does your average citizen put pressure on the government or agencies to help change these systems from the bottom up? And that is definitely the concluding question of the day, Scott. Any suggestions there?
I think when I mentioned sentiment is changing, we know that mainstream media is starting to be forced to report what's actually going on. They're missing a lot. And I think your average citizen having conversations about this and not being afraid to speak out, because I think a lot of people were and have been worried about, upsetting the apple cart, etc., or, having a comment that doesn't fit with the narrative. And I think that groupthink is undermining what we actually need to be doing, which is having debate over these things. So bringing it up in your family, speaking to your MLA and your MPs and writing letters, asking them for answers and action about the things that are going on. There's no denying it now. There's enough in open source that, people like me that work in the classified domains, we can just point to that information and say, yeah, now you guys have got it. Now you have the information you need to do something about what's going on here. So changing the sentiment, amongst yourselves in society is going to make a big difference.
Okay, so let us speak up. Let us join hands as citizens and realize this is an important issue. It's a real and present danger, and we need to get on it for the sake of our country. I think it's also very interesting and very timely that the inquiry on foreign election interference has been wrapping things up. And that's been pretty mixed, hasn't it, Scott? But this is all interrelated as you think about the usual suspects still trying to interfere with our elections. Our elections. We should be all over that, shouldn't we, Scott? What's the key takeaway there as we look to wrap up that inquiry, and what can we do?
Yeah, I think, foreign interference is a new term that someone made up. When I mentioned hybrid warfare, that falls under the political aspect. So that's sharp power. It's called sharp power. And that goes from grassroots right on up to the top of the federal government. If you want to know about the 11 MPs that they're talking about, read the book. What's happening? It's all in there. What's happening with the foreign interference piece is concerning because a lot of it's being held back. Yes, people are speaking out, but kind of like the Cullen Commission, there's a bit of a whitewash going on. And I hate to say it, but Ottawa, the cognitive dissonance that's in Ottawa, it boggles the mind that they don't understand the complexity of what's happening in the country, or that they don't want the country to know because anti-government sentiment is at such a high right now. It provides opportunities for some radical extremist groups to jump on the bandwagon when someone speaks about something, which is another way to discredit them. And to think that that's not planned, well, it is. So we'll see, neo-Nazi groups that jump on someone that's just trying to say, hey, we need to look at this, because it's a way for them to both recruit, but also gain notoriety and sort of normalize who they are. So in the foreign interference piece, I mean, some of the big actors that I've been talking about have donated and arranged for fundraising for political parties. Now I'm nonpartisan. I don't. It doesn't really sway me either way. The interference that's been going on, and I'm going to say mainly from China, it doesn't matter which party you're in. You're going to experience it. Because they hedge their bets. They don't put all their apples in one cart. They know how to do this. They've been doing this a long time.
I think you're right. And it's not just elected officials, it's key people within all our key institutions across this country. And I have seen it. And so this is a real issue that we can't be naive to, but we've got to be able to speak up and say no more of this. This is unacceptable. And in fact, if you want to know more, don't just simply read Scott's book. Also look at a comment from Norwood Cooper, who says, Sam Cooper wrote a book, Willful Blindness. I would recommend that book as well. It's a great read about the laundering of money in BC at the casinos. So I would again recommend that book. So we have covered a lot today, my friend Scott McGregor and our audience, and I'm really grateful that we could all come together and talk about this important issue. So we really appreciate everyone's comments and participation. Make sure you join us every week here, and also be sure to sign up for our newsletter at the Frontier Center for Public Policy. We welcome your comments. I'm just trying to see, what was that comment there? Good people need to take interest in running for boards, politics, government positions, and if you don't, the leftists will. Well said, Brian. So we're in a situation where the role of citizens has never been more important as we look at all kinds of agents that work at this. So in the meantime, I want to thank you very much to the audience, and thank you very much, Scott, for joining in this conversation today.
It's been my pleasure.